Glad to see everybody here this morning. We're studying in Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter. And last week we finished up verse 28, so we'll start with verse 29. It's that higher Wayne County math. So we're studying the Song of Moses, and hopefully we'll finish it. We'll finish it up today and make some good progress toward finishing up Deuteronomy that we've been studying now for several months and go someplace else. We're talking about God revealing through Moses the punishment and trials that the children of Israel will be going through because they decide that they want to follow another God once they get into the promised land. And we're going to kind of continue in that thought today as we move on. So before we go any further, I'd like for Kevin Cleveland, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day, for this time we have to assemble to study the Word. We pray you be with us as we go through this, that we glean something from it and apply it to our everyday life. Give Brother David as he directs our minds, that you give him a recollection of the things that he's studied. Thank you for Jesus and his blood that was shed on that cross. Forgive us where we fall short. In his name we pray. Amen.
Okay, so let's start out by looking at verses 29 through 31. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. How should one seize 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight, except their rock had sold them, and the Lord had shut them up? For their rock is not our rock, even our enemies themselves being judged. So we're talking about here again about wisdom. And it refers to here the thought that apostasy from God and the Lord is sure to follow by the severest judgment. And that's kind of been the theme as we go through here, that because of this apostasy or the moving away from God, that there's going to be severe judgment. And this is something that the children of Israel should kind of recognize, that in the past their small army has defeated larger armies without any problem at all. And the reason for that is because of their rock. Now their rock here obviously is the Lord. And if you'll notice in the text, we're talking about two different rocks here. We're talking about rock with a capital R, meaning Jehovah, and then we're talking about the small rock would be the gods of the other people who were actually false gods that had no power. But and even the enemies of the children of Israel, they recognized after a while that their gods were pretty much powerless against Jehovah. And they could see this situation, but the children of Israel couldn't see their situation. So if the children of Israel were wise, they could easily conquer all these other foes because the power of God would be on their side. But what they have done is they've forsaken the Lord, which is the capital R rock that's there, and they have basically given up the power that they had to their foes, because they were a smaller group of people going up against a more powerful person. And I don't think that the English language shows this in the power that God or that Moses is talking about here, and how emphatic and how frustrated Moses is that the children of Israel have forgotten this, because the scholars say that the words that are used in the original text were very emphatic and very distinct, and showed a little bit of frustration on Moses' part that they would get themselves into this situation. So Israel could have put all the enemies to flight, but they ended up being slaves, and in a sense, because of the apostasy that they had toward God, God was going to put them into basically a slavery situation. They've gone from being the conqueror and the master to being the slave. And the words in there, the soul in it, they've given up. It's kind of a prophetic type situation, and it's written as though, even though it hasn't happened yet, it is so sure to happen in the future that it's written as though it has already happened. Of course, the children of Israel hasn't entered the promised land yet when Moses has given them this song. So they're basically turning their power over to the heathens, and God is going to punish them through the things that the heathen are going to be doing to them because of their apostasy. So they've traded a solid rock, the rock of Jehovah, for a small rock, which are these false gods. Comments about those verses?
And the implication is that the capital R rock can also switch to the other side if Israel's unfaithful, which it was. And of course, they might be a weak nation. They might be a small nation even compared to Israel. But big R rock will lead them to victory as he did.
Right.
Like trading granite for sandstone.
Basically, right. That's a good comparison. All right, let's look at verses 32 and 33. For their vine is of the vine of Sodom, and the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of gall, their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of dragons, and the cruel venom of asps. So the Jews here are wicked, and they're rebellious, and they're being compared here basically to the Sodomites. And they're kind of the vine and the fruits of the vine in this situation. And that's not a very good thing to be compared to, and something that God is not going to be happy with. And he's talking about the inhabitants of the land. It talks here about their grapes, and this is their actions. They're like gall and worms, wood producing that basically it's not going to produce anything except misery and discomfort. And it talks here about their clusters being bitter. Their united exertions, as well as all their individual acts together, are going to be sinful, and they're going to go on continuously. And that the wine here is meant, of course, or the vine is the people, and the grapes is their moral conduct. And Isaiah talks about this in Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. And this is Moses is talking prophecy, and Isaiah here is talking about a little bit more what happens. It's start with verse 1. It says, "Hearken me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek Jehovah, look unto the rock wherein ye were hewn, to the hole of the pit whence ye were digged. Look unto Abraham your father, and to Sarah that bare you, for when he was one, I called him, I blessed him, and made him many. For Jehovah has comforted Zion, he hath comforted all her waste places, and hath made her wilderness like Eden, for her desert like a garden of Jehovah. Joy and gladness shall found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. Attend unto me, O my people, and hear me, O my nation, for a law shall go forth from me, and I will establish my justice for light people. My righteousness is near, my salvation. My faith is gone. Mine arm shall judge the people. The isles shall wait for me, and my arm shall they trust. Lift up your eyes to heaven and look upon the earth beneath, for heaven shall vanish away like smoke, and the earth shall wax like the old garment, and they that dwell therein shall die in like manner. But my salvation shall be forever, and my righteousness shall not be abolished. Hearken unto me, ye that know righteousness, for the people whom heart is my law, for fear ye not reproach men, neither be dismayed at their revelings. So it's very like the grapes that's produced in this area here. This is the area that he's talking about here, this lake of Aphrodite, where Sodom and Gomorrah formerly stood. And it was an area, even though that Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed, it was an area that grew grapes and still produced some type of produce. But the grapes that were produced were very acidic. They had a very disagreeable taste, and if you ate them, it would make you sick. So he's comparing the Israelites and the things that they have done to Sodom and Gomorrah and the produce and the things that were coming out of there. And this is this was their system and their teachings and all these things. They were poison. And of course, what they're talking about here in the doctrine, this is the doctrine of the heathens. That their doctrines were poison, and they were going to be fatal, and they were going to be destructive to anybody that follows the things that the heathens are doing here. So he's not painting a very good picture for the children of Israel here, and because of their apostasy and their lack of wisdom in the situation, this is what they're going to end up. And if memory serves me correct, several of the scholars mentioned that they never ever referred to the heathens in a Sodom and Gomorrah way, that they had they took no offense to being called anything that has to do with Sodom and Gomorrah. But this was referring to the children of Israel. Anything with Sodom and Gomorrah was an insult to the things that the children of Israel were doing.
There's actually a good application for today in these couple of verses, and it's very simple. It's appearances can be deceiving, and you got to extend the lesson a little bit here to go back to Abraham and Lot. What did Lot do? Well, Abraham gave him a choice. Lot pitched his tents towards Sodom. Why? Because it's good grazing land there. But what was the result of Lot pitching his tents towards Sodom? Nothing but trouble. And what Moses is drawing the picture here is the wine might look good, the grapes might look good, but man, they taste terrible. Terrible. So appearances can be deceiving, and it's a lesson for us even today.
Good point. Any other comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verse 34. Is it not laid up in store with me and sealed up among my treasures? So the fruit of this degenerate wine, this bitter wine in these clusters of grapes is basically poison. And this is the evil principles and practices of the children of Israel that is basically unknown to God in the things that He wants them to do. And Moses is warning them here to notice this, that this needs to be laid up in their mind, that these things could happen. And when they do these things, God is going to remember this and the things that they do, and they need to stay away from it. So these deeds or engagements which the persons were bound at a specific time to fulfill, this is going to happen, and they were sealed. This is prophecy that is so sure that he's talking here about in a sense that it's already appeared, and God is going to have His justice, and He's pledging to avenge the things that the children of Israel do when they break the covenant that He made with the Jews. And the time was going to come where this is going to take place. Now we see here in verse 35, it says, "To me belongeth vengeance, and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time. for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste. Another translation of that is, vengeance and retribution belong to me. Their foot shall slide in time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come on them make haste. Now let's move on to verse 36 while we're kind of in this thought. Verse 36 says, for the Lord shall judge his people and repent him for his servants when they seeth that their power is gone and there is none shut up or left. Another translation of that verse is, for Jehovah will bring his people justice, and he shall have compassion on his servants, for he sees that their power is gone and only the imprisoned and abandoned remain. So the Lord is going to punish his people for their sins in due time. It's going to happen. And of course, the vengeance belongs to the Lord. We read about that also in the New Testament. He says it belongs to me, and it's his right to impart or to inflict this vengeance upon the children of Israel. So the shaking of the foot is a figure representing the commencement of the fall or of the stumbling. So the time is going to come when the children of Israel do what they need to do to get themselves in trouble, and it's like a sudden slip or a fall. It's going to happen. And though the clause is not at or toward the time when the misfortune begins, he's going to plunge them into this great calamity. So, once it starts, it's kind of like when you slip and fall. Once you slip and start to fall, there's no stopping it. You're going to hit the ground and suffer the consequences of whatever bone you break when you hit the ground. So this vengeance and retribution is not a mere announcement of the quality, but it's founded in the nature of God residing in himself, and he's the one who has the authority to do it. And it shows a divine energy that the small rock doesn't have. And he's going to manifest himself as an avenger and a recompenser and somebody who's going to shake the situation up.
Verse 36 actually goes in another direction, though, because it also is saying that the Lord's going to vindicate his people. And what does that mean? Well, their conquerors are also going to be punished eventually.
Right, and it's kind of pointing to things that we've talked about before about the remnant. All the children of Israel is not the problem, but it's the group. So the good are going to be punished with the bad. And of course, that happens a lot. And there's going to be a time when God says, "Okay, I've had enough. Now I'm going to take justice upon the people who's causing the problem." And there's never been a time in the Bible where the oppressors of Israel have not eventually been punished. But God's going to wait until, he says here, until all of their power is gone, and the only ones that are left are the imprisoned and the abandoned ones. That's all that's left. They're at the absolute low, and he's going to have compassion on those that are left, on this remnant. And then he's going, like Bill said, he's going to go through and he's going to punish the oppressor for the things that they've done. And, history will tell us, not only in the Bible, but history itself will tell us that, the children of Israel were treated pretty harshly by these enemies. And in the end, though, the children of Israel came out of it. They were restored, and vengeance was brought, and the retribution was brought against the one who were inflicting the pain upon the children of Israel or the heathens. So he's going to judge his people. He's going to punish them, He has the authority to do that. He's the sovereign. But when the time comes and there's been enough punishment, then it's going to switch over to the other side, and the other side is going to be punished also when the children of Israel are restored. So it's a just situation. There's punishment for the ones in each case that causes the problem, but he's not going to punish them to the point where they're going to be completely annihilated. Other comments about those verses. Okay, let's look at verses 37 and 38. And he shall say, where are their gods, their rock in whom they trusted, which did eat the fat of their sacrifices and drink the wine of their drink offerings? Let them rise up and help you and be your protection. So the children of Israel he's asking a question here. Well, what about these new gods that you're worshiping now? When all these problems come, where are they going to be? Where are they going to be there to help you? Well, you know what? They're not going to be there to help you. They have no power against the true and the living God. And I mean, this is kind of a slap in the face there, and kind of an I told you so moment that Moses is talking to the children of Israel here about. And why are these gods not doing anything to help the children of Israel? And if they were paying attention and that wisdom was there that Moses was talking about, they would figure this out pretty quick. But obviously they didn't figure it out pretty quick, and they got themselves in a bad situation. Comments about that verse or those verses. All right, let's look at verse 39. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God with me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand. So the appeal to their experience of worthlessness of idols is followed by a demand that they should know and acknowledge Jehovah, the only true and living God. He's talked about these gods that can't help them, and he is comparing himself to the true, or they're comparing themselves to the true and the living God. And in the original language, this I is very emphatic. Like, you're pounding your chest and saying it's me or it's I, and I'm the only one that is capable of doing this. And Jehovah manifests himself in what he can do, and showing him, what Israel has already experienced and could continue to experience if they stay in the ways of God. And I mean, if you look, in these few verses, he says quite a bit. He is able to kill, but yet he is also able to make alive. So he has the power over life and death. That's pretty powerful when you have the power over life and death. And compared to these other gods, and they learned that in Egypt. The Egyptians thought their God was pretty powerful, but he had no power over life and death. And that was a lesson that the children of Israel learned while they were in Egypt, about a God who had power over life and death. And these words do not refer to the immortal soul, but to the restoration of life of the people of Israel, which God had delivered them up from death and has the ability to do it in the future. This thought in the following one, which is equally conciliatory: God smites and heals again, as frequently repeated by the prophets. So here's a situation where God puts his people down and then he raises them back up. He has the power to do that. And again, that's a power that these other gods don't have. So Moses is contrasting the power of the false gods versus the power of the true and the living God. Comments about that verse or those verses. All right, let's look at verses 40 through 42. For I lift up my hand to heaven and say, I live forever. If I wield my glittering sword and mine hand take hold on judgment, I will render vengeance to mine enemies and will renew them that hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, and that with the blood of the slain and of the captives from the beginning of revenges upon the enemy. So the Lord will show himself as the only true and the living God who slays and makes alive, like he talked about before. And he will take vengeance upon the enemies and avenge the blood of his servants, and he will restore the land to his people. And with this promise, which is the fulfillment and comfort for all the servants of God, this is the end of the Song of Moses here. And we see here a victory in the end. And that's the hope that Moses is telling these people. You're going to go out there, you're going to mess up. Things are going to happen. You're going to go away, but in the end, God is going to restore you, and he is going to take vengeance upon his enemy. And he's going to lift up his hand, and this is a situation where he's making a promise. It's this lifting up your hand like you're making an oath or a promise. This is as sure as you're going to get, because God has promised that this is going to happen, and this promise comes down from heaven, that they need to listen to the things that God has said here. And you can't swear by anything greater than God. So this is an oath that these things are going to happen. And the avenger of his people upon their foes, the Lord is represented as a warlike hero who welts his sword and has a quiver full of arrows. He had a quiver full of arrows against the children of Israel for the bad things that they did. Well, this same type and quiver of arrows he's going to have, and the things that happen to the children of Israel are going to happen to the enemy. And he has the judgment in his hand, and it's there ready to be hurled against the foes of the children of Israel in due time. And he has the weapons, and he's ready to execute the judgment when the time has come to do this. And not only at one time he's going to have vengeance against the children of Israel, he's also going to have vengeance against the enemies of the children of Israel, and he's going to repay them for all the things that he has done. And this punishment is a retribution for the evil that was done not only by the children of Israel, but also by the enemies. So these enemies here, of course, the haters of Jehovah, and there were lots of them out there. So any comments or questions about
interesting language there, that first line in verse 42. He actually personifies an arrow. He says your arrows are going to get drunk with blood.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty creative. That sounds like something from Old English almost.
Yeah, I mean he's going to be God is going to turn into a warrior, and I mean Moses is talking to them in things that they into things that they understand in these situations. Okay. So let's move on now to verse 43. Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people. So for this retribution which God has accompanied or accomplished with the enemies, the nations that they're going to praise the Lord for the things that's done. And as the song commenced with an appeal to heaven and earth to give glory to God, it's suitable here at the end that it closes with an appeal to the heathens to rejoice with his people on the account of the acts of the Lord. And the reason for this rejoicing is the judgment through which the Lord avenges the blood of his servants and repays his foes. And as the enemies of God are not the heathens as such, so the servants of Jehovah are not the nation of Israel as a whole, but faithful servants whom the Lord had at all times among his people, and who were persecuted, oppressed, and put to death by the ungodly. And by this the land was defiled and covered with blood, guiltlessness, so that the Lord was obliged to interpose as a judge and to put to an end the ways of the wicked and the things that were being done to the land. And his people eventually would be wiped out of their guilt from the rest of the people. And this punishment would go through not only to the children of Israel, but to his people. And then here in verse 44 it says, "And Moses came and spake all the words of this song in the ears of the people, he and Joshua the son of Nun." So here's the closing of this song, and it kind of brackets all of this, and this shows here that Moses delivered this song unto the people, and he did it in such a way that miraculously all of them got to hear this, and Joshua was pretty much right there by his side. So we're in a transition here between Joshua has been installed as the new leader, and he's standing there right beside Moses as Moses is kind of giving his final, I guess, farewell speech is what you could call this. And this is kind of the end of the song, and it's communicated to the nation. And this was something that they needed to recite and they needed to remember through the generations. And Moses did this to remind them of the things that were going to happen if they didn't follow the things of God. And what we know from history that they did pretty good for a while, but then as time went on, they kind of fell away from God and more into the worldly type of things which God wanted them to stay out of. Comments about the song of Moses? Yes.
Deuteronomy 39, it talks about the self-sufficient God. Now see that even I am He, and there are no gods beside me. It reminds me of a verse in Isaiah chapter 46. And I'm starting from verse 8. It says, "Remember this and show yourselves men. Recall to mind, O you transgressors. Remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning." I just think it's so great. God knows exactly what's going to happen before it happens. And speaking to the self-sufficient God like that's the God that we worship. We worship a God that doesn't need to be explained. I am God, and there is none like me. Just the similarities they're pretty neat.
Good comment. Okay, verses 45 through 52 is kind of a narrative interlude between this part and the end of the chapter. And this narrative section of Deuteronomy relates to the final exhortation that Moses gives the Israelites and an announcement of his death that he's received from the Lord. So we're kind of changing course here, and we're kind of pointing the way into chapter 33 and 34 where Moses eventually fades from the scene, and there's a transition between Moses as the leader and Joshua as the leader. So let's look at verses 45 through 47. "And Moses made an end of speaking of all these words to all Israel. And he said unto them, Set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which ye shall command your children to observe to do all the words of this law. For it is not a vain thing for you, because it is your life. And though this thing ye shall prolong your days on the land, whether ye go over Jordan to possess it. So basically what Moses is doing here in verses 45 through 47 is he is exhorting the children of Israel once again and kind of a final time to obey the things that God tells them to do. He's addressing again the entire group. He's giving them the song, and he's telling them, look, take the information and this song to heart, and not just listen to the words, but live by the things that you have been taught and all of the things that are in the law. And he points out that these words are not flippant. It's not an offhanded afterthought that these words are going to be fulfilled. And if they follow the words and they do the things, not only are they going to be happy in the promised land, but they're going to have a longer life in the promised land. We have a promise in the New Testament also that if we follow the things of God, we're going to have a longer life. So Moses is telling him here, look, take these things to heart, and do the things that you need to do, and it's going to be a good thing for you to do. How much time I got left here, Keith?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
One thing he says too in verse 46, he doesn't want the words to die, because he tells them, you teach it to your children. They need to teach their children. You need to go generation by generation. Keep what has been said alive. Keep the veracity of the law, the power of the law alive, and make sure that it is faithfully kept. It's very much as we keep the New Testament alive when we teach it, and when we pass it along to our children, and they do it as well. That's what Moses is saying here. He says, don't let the law die. Don't let the words die.
Right.
You can see that exactly is what happened. Just like you said, they followed pretty good for a while, and then all of a sudden they kind of split astray. And that right there is exactly why.
Right. And one of the things that if you read through the commentaries and stuff, and I've disagreed with this quite a way, the commentators seem to think that all they're talking about is what's written in Deuteronomy. That's not right. We're talking about the entire law that was given, in the Pentateuch, not just because there's things in Deuteronomy that's not in Numbers. There's things in Numbers that's not there. He's talking about the whole law here that's been given over this period of time, not just the narrow focus. And I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in Deuteronomy, but there's also a lot of good stuff in the other books also that need to be followed.
What did we say? Deuteronomy meant it was a second telling.
Right.
They're already heard.
Right. And they need to follow the entire law, not just pick and choose the things that they want to follow. And that's a lesson today. We've got to follow the whole New Testament, not just the parts that we want to follow. So we'll pick up next week with verse 48. I appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.